You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is David Smith. He's the senior analyst for the Morgan Report, which you can find online at silver-investor.com. Welcome to the show, David.
Good to be back, Jim.
We were talking about how hard it's going to be to get a hold of a decent amount of precious metal in the future. Even though prices are down a bit today, there's still a long-term strategy involved here. And you thought perhaps the theme for today's show should be palladium and silver will be the ammunition in the physical versus paper financial war. Maybe explain that for us.
Well, I think there's a very good analogy here without discussing the pros and cons of whether it should happen or why it happened. In terms of, in the United States, the issue of acquiring ammunition. And over the last few years, there's been increasing concerns by people, valid or otherwise, that it might be hard at some point to get ammunition for their rifles and their handguns and things like this due to government policies and due to the concerns going on in the society. And so I've watched this pretty carefully because it's an interesting study in human nature, and I think there's a direct correlation in looking at the metals on this, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But each time there would be some kind of a concern, a potential law passed, a new bill, whatever, on the part of the public, you would see a large movement into buying more guns and ammunition. And the price would go up, and for a time it would be kind of difficult to get particular items. But then it would subside, kind of like the premiums going down a little bit in the metals after the fear of that event lessened. And you would be able to, the supply was still there. It would be more expensive, but it would be available. And each time it was like waves coming into the beach. These waves would get a little bigger and a little bigger, and they would always subside, and you could always still buy the product, even though it cost a bit more. And sometimes the price would even drop a bit. And then finally, you ended up with a situation this spring where it was like a dam breaking, and people just started buying ammunition and going to these different gun shows. And I looked at a couple of these, or watched a couple of these where shows that a few hundred people would attend. Now there were thousands, and there was not much available, and the prices of everything went through the roof. Well, now it's very difficult to find a box of ammunition, and you're going to pay several times more for it than you would have 6 months ago. And so, for example, little 22 rounds, produced by the hundreds of millions, used to be you could buy them for a nickel a round, and some people are paying 50 cents a round now. So I think what we're going to see with the metals, we talked a couple weeks ago, and our interview was posted, as many of them are, on David Morgan's Silver Guru YouTube/Silver Guru website. And we got a lot of hits on the one which we entitled Metal Cuts Paper, the Gold and Silver Disconnect has arrived, and people are still viewing that, and we're still getting a lot of interest in that. So I think this carries out what we started talking about a few weeks ago, and that is that we had this breakdown in the middle of April on gold and silver through support levels. It was a bit of a panic. Prices dropped sharply, and instead of what you would expect happening, that where buying would dry up in the physical market, the physical market did not correspond to the paper market. So paper prices were way down, but the physical prices, in some cases, had hardly changed at all in relationship to what they'd been the previous week. And so now you see, for example, in April, the U.S. Mint sold over 4 million American Silver Eagles, and they sold 3 times as many gold Eagles as they had the April of last year. And so this buying, and not just in the United States, but in Canada, hard to find Canadian maple leafs, all over the world, in Asia, in Hong Kong, and Shanghai, in Australia, in Europe, a spontaneous buying on the part of the public arose. This isn't hedge funds going out and buying the stuff and storing it away. It's the average people, many of whom, just like you and me, many of whom have never owned the metals before. And so they're going out and doing this. And I think you're going to see, this wave recede a little bit. For example, we're talking today and the metals are down. And then the next crisis, and we don't know where exactly when it'll come from, that really puts in people's minds that, hey, holding all of my assets in paper currency is really pretty risky because it gets taken down by inflation, which is government theft of your money, of the purchasing power of it, and it gets taken down sometimes literally, as in Cyprus, by having it stolen from you by the banksters themselves.
You're advocating then that people make sure that, A, they can get access to gold and silver when the prices start going up and people realize, gosh, this stuff might not be as available as it was in the past. How can you make sure that you have enough and have access?
I think people need to seriously consider the ramifications and the implications of what's going on and ask themselves, as you know, the top people in the field have been saying, have things fundamentally changed? Are the governments not printing trillions of extra paper dollars and paper money, whether it's digitally or in reality, that they didn't have before with no backing? Look what's going on in Japan. Look what's going on in the European Union, in the United States. Have these things changed? Is there fiscal responsibility being brought in any of these areas? And my position is that nothing has changed for the better, unfortunately. And so the precious metals, which have been hedges for thousands of years, are going to continue to be so. And the way I would, the reason that I titled this today, the informal title, is Palladium and Silver, is because, as we talked about 6 months ago, I believe that palladium and platinum are going to lead the charge higher because they have very, very severe supply-demand disconnects. Just yesterday it came out in a major report that they're expecting the biggest supply deficit of palladium in the last 7 to 10 years. That's going to continue probably for 2 or 3 more years. And I think that's going to create a very powerful up move in the PGMs, platinum and palladium. Right now, they're weak too, like silver and gold, but they've held up much better on a technical position. And I think those metals will lead the charge because of their own supply-demand matrix. And then we'll see later on, whether it's this fall or whenever, we'll see a recommencement of the gold and silver up-leg bull market, which has been going on for 12 years. And it'll be rising because of their own dimensions. But all of them will have the commonality in one respect, and that is people want things that have not just utility of being able to exchange for goods and services, which paper and currency can do, but also the metals do the same thing, but they have intrinsic value in and among themselves. They have uses for other things, in industry, in jewelry, in medicine. And so, as such, they are they're much more powerful than paper currencies, and they tend to hold their value over time, unlike paper currencies, which all end up going into oblivion in terms of purchasing power over time.
As the U.S. federal government ended or found a way around this budget impasse, apparently because senators and congressmen were being delayed getting home and getting back to Washington because of the cutbacks in the aviation industry, they went and solved that pretty fast. Do we have to have them affected personally for anything to get the U.S. government back on the same page as the rest of the world?
It's more than cooperation. We have a vested interest in the ruling class has a vested interest in the status quo and continuing to have more consumption than they have anything to back it up. And so the people in middle America don't have any say over this anymore because of the collusion of the banks, the regulators, and the governing classes. And that's the same thing in Europe. And until that mindset changes on their part, whether it's forced upon them because the system just collapses or it stops working, freezes up, or whether they're voted out of office and we have a new breed of people coming in, maybe people that actually are going to be constrained by the very laws that they passed, that's not going to change. For example, we have in the so-called Obamacare now, the legislators who passed this massive program on the rest of us, they don't want to participate in it. They don't want their aides to participate. They don't want the lobbyists. They're trying to get a vote, kind of a sneak under the radar vote, to change that so that they don't have to participate. Well, if they participated, maybe they would read the bills that they signed before they're passed. And given any kind of a change in that attitude of having people that you could really respect as your leaders, the people, the founding fathers in the United States, for example, or like Cincinnatus in Rome, he went out and saved Rome and then went back to becoming a farmer rather than staying on as a dictator. Until those things change, you're not going to see a fundamental change in the way business is done. Same thing with Europe. Here we have the guy that came up with the idea of the euro, saying that the European Union should be dissolved and the euro done away with because it's a disaster. The guy that came up with the idea. So when the originators are saying things like this, what do you think about the viability of what's going on? And you either get some ammunition, you get platinum and palladium and gold and silver, and you get some ammunition in the war against physical versus paper because physical is going to win, or you stand at the long side, and when the day comes where nothing is available at any price, then you go, what do I do now?
Did that huge correction that happened a few weeks ago scare people away from the precious metals market, leaving the big investors who understand it to play the game on their own?
Leaving investors of all sizes who understand it to play the game on their own. There are people that can only afford to buy 5 ounces of silver at a time or 1 ounce. They get it. More and more people are getting it because the evidence is becoming overwhelming. This isn't just a bunch of big investors buying it. It's people coming off the street, all walks of life. Look at the Japanese. They've lost 30% of their purchasing power as the government intentionally devalues the yen. They're lining up to buy gold, whereas they were selling it just 6 months ago. So more people are getting it, and it's one of those things that's becoming very self-evident. So it's fascinating. It's scary. If we see gold and silver drop to new lows but where they were at the middle of April, I think you're going to uncover even more buying as people understand it, and it moves into strong hands. And those many little hands, those many little strong hands, are going to be the ones that actually determine the outcome of this war. And as I said before, in the past, physical has always won in the war over paper. You go back thousands of years, it's always had the same outcome.
And Americans probably are familiar with the phrase, we hold these truths to be self-evident.
That's a good way to look at it. These truths that you and I are talking about today are self-evident. This isn't just our opinion. These are things that have been shown throughout history to be valid. And human nature hasn't changed either, and that's why this is taking place, because people are understanding, and they have the fear right now, they have the fear of losing. If they're going to lose their purchasing power as the entities, the government and the bank entities, take control of the paper they thought was theirs, but then in extremis, they've changed the rules. And every major country in the world has rules along the lines of what Cyprus has, and basically has admitted it, that if things really get down and dirty, they're going to change the rules. They're going to commandeer your account. They're going to keep you from taking very much out if you want it. Look what's going on in Argentina. If you really want to see in extremis how things work, you can't take more than $100 out of the country at a time. So if people think that that is not going to happen and they listen to what politicians tell them, then they just are naive, and they're going to get stuck with the short end of the stick when the inevitable decline in the purchasing power of their paper currency takes place.
Right, and huge government debts don't help the situation either.
No, they're the focus of it, and the governments can only pay off these debts by inflating the currency. They pay off with nominal dollars that have less purchasing power, or outright default, or outright theft. And inflation is a form of theft. Very few people understand that, but it's not that complicated once you do the research.
Any danger the Chinese will tell America, you owe us trillions, you're going to have to pay that in gold?
Well, they are accumulating gold at a very rapid pace, and the day may well come when they say, by the way, we are backing our currency with gold, and we actually have it. And that will be quite an interesting day if that should happen.
Well, thanks a lot, David. Again, another interesting week on the markets, and people who are trying to stay with the fundamentals, as you said, have a plan and stick to it. A long-term plan is always better than no plan at all.
It's been fascinating discussing this today with you, Jim. Equal amounts of fear and excitement, and that's what makes any project worthwhile. So I hope that our listeners will do their own research, go to David Morgan's YouTube website, read the writings that he has, maybe even subscribe to his newsletter, and educate themselves, and then make informed decisions that work really well just for them.
Thank you very much, David. My guest has been David Smith. He's the senior analyst for the Morgan Report, which you can find online at silver-investor.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. You can contact us at info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.